Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Spiderhead. This, of course, is a Chris Hemsworth, Miles Teller Netflix movie. So I kind of feel like this movie has to rely on really just the two actors selling this film. And because really, like, this movie is to just be a drug film that is to go on and have Chris Hemsworth be the like the company owner of this drug place, and supposedly there is to be this kind of board that is to also have Chris Hemsworth go to and ask them what exactly they want, or that things are going far enough, so on and so forth, supposedly. So we have Steve Abnesti, who of course is Chris Hemsworth's character, who is to go on and have all these wide ranges of feelings and emotions to kind of push. Like Jeff at one point is to go on, Miles Teller's character is to go on and see something ugly and say it's beautiful, or eventually a guy is to be laughing uncontrollably, or a guy is to be consuming food and he's consistently hungry. So we go on and we have all these wild range of emotions, and at first it's all like the good side of things, but then eventually we have this twist and we have this dark side of things with this other drug that of course is to make people uh, angry, upset, uh, in fear, sick, and we have Steve that's going on like, man, like we can really go on and sell all these kinds of drugs to people. Like, man, like we're gonna make a ton of money. Like we're gonna get the Nobel Prize. It's gonna happen. But then all of a sudden we start to realize people are getting used far much more than they are to think they are. And that eventually, when one person is to put into an experiment first, all of a sudden he realizes that there's going to be that same thing done to him. And he is like, whoa, hold on a minute. So we start to get people who are realizing what kind of situations that they're forced to be in, and that everybody will eventually get the same treatment. It's a vicious circle that at some point we have Jeff to be mostly focused in on, that he will consistently be doing more experiments, it seems, than anyone else. And then come to find out, we eventually have Steve find out uh, little things about his people that he is to be in this compound with, as well as twist and turn and manipulate them to keep going on the way they're going on, just trying to justify or say things that would possibly comfort somebody, but it's probably a lie. As well as we start to find out that there are a number of people that are possibly lying in this movie and we're not getting the whole truth. So, with that said, I would say that this movie, based on star power alone, would deem this movie to have me just say that it's an okay film, and that's being nice to it. It's a very flat film. Nothing is to really be heavily unexpected in a drug movie where they're testing all these drugs, medications, putting certain things into people. And so really we go on and find out that of all these other kind of drugs that they've been putting into people, really all they give a about is just one drug, really. And that is the one drug that they want to sell. So, with that said, let's go on into the double five time territory. Let's just, of course, go in to spoiler time. Spoiler time, it's about that time you spoil this movie. More than likely, I might not go on and remember the exact uh, name of every single drug that they input into people. I know there was like Darken Flops or whatever goofy name that is to be, of course, the fear drug or the drug that starts to make people sick. Um, I know that like that's the name of like Darken whatever. But then everything else is like B16, I-95 or whatever. Like it has all these kind of weird, goofy things because there's a whole reason for that. We come to find out. So we go on into this story, and the first thing is that uh, we have Steve, who's played by Chris Hemsworth, and a guy who is Verlaine, who goes on and administers these drugs to people. So Jeff is to go outside with Chris Hemsworth and Valerian and or Verlaine, and is to see these certain areas, and is to say, "Wow, they're beautiful," because he's forced to, because this drug is to basically give him like a kind of euphoria kind of feel, where it's like, man, like regardless of what I'm seeing, it's all beautiful, to the point where Jeff is to see this place that is going on and being hazardous, and is to go on and spew out all this like smoke and everything like that, and Jeff is to go on and still say that it's beautiful. So we have Steve that administers this test to a man, and is to start telling him jokes, and like these jokes are pretty mild, uh, and so this guy starts laughing about these jokes, and then Steve turns around and like, well, like how about we just go on and just start reading him facts. And so they start reading him facts and talking about Rwanda, talking about how long his sentence is, and he still just laughs uncontrollably. And they're like, huh, like maybe we can start selling this to comedy clubs at some point to just kind of get this out there. So after we've kind of administered those kind of drugs, so we have Jeff and we have Lizzie, and they seem to be like the lovers in this, because there always has to be like this kind of relationship scenario in a film, where they're kind of both in the same scenario. And so Jeff is to go on to meet with Lizzie, who is to be the snack person, and so is he. And so we have Jeff and we have Lizzie, and Jeff is to mention, it's like, well, hey, like, isn't it interesting that at some points we kind of say one another's sentences? And Lizzie's like, I never really thought about it. So we also have in this movie some interesting music being played at some points. Like She Blinded Me with Science is being used, or a Hall & Oates song is to, of course, be used, but Blinding Me with Science is kind of fun for them to kind of use in this movie. But so eventually Jeff and eventually Lizzie are really having what Jeff hopes is to be a relationship, but like Jeff doesn't really have the feeling that Lizzie really cares about him. So Jeff kind of wants to go on and eventually ask Verlaine to take him off like snack duty, just to kind of do something else. Because like he wants to kind of create distance from this girl because he's afraid he's going to get hurt because he's been hurt in the past. So we have Steve and Verlaine who go on and do this other experiment. So Jeff and a girl named Heather are going into this room. And so they're like, okay, like, what should we be expecting here? So we have both of them being asked, like, well, hey, how attractive do you think that this person is? How attractive do you think that person is? So Jeff is to go on and say that this girl is like a 7, and then eventually he changes his answer to an 8. And then Heather goes on and is to say that it's, well, he's about a 5. So they always have to say acknowledge so that way they can eventually get their drugs, whatever their drug is for that day. Because they really don't know. They're just kind of like being experimented on and see what happens. And they always have to be very vocal about what's really going on. So, like, Steve is to always want them to talk about how they're feeling and whatever. So, this drug, of course, is to make these two fall in love with one another and be in the throes of passion. And so we immediately see these two kissing one another, ripping off clothes, and then after they go into the passionate making of love that they, of course, are to do, they have them cuddle afterwards. And so Jeff and Heather are to tell one another that they love one another and they've never really known one another ever before this moment. So Steve is going on like, oh my god, we found like a love drug. Like, so now we're just going to go on and see if these like kind of emotions, if they linger, if Jeff is to still feel anything for Heather after this moment. So we have Jeff that eventually is to also go on and find another experiment with another girl that he is less attractive with, I guess, let's say. And they have to go through that same exact experiment. And Verlaine is just like, I don't want to watch this. Like, I know, no. So they go on, and afterwards we have Verlaine that is adjusting Jeff's drug kind of from the back of his back, because that's where they kind of keep this like med pack for all these drugs to put in people. So Jeff is asking Verlaine, is there like any kind of drug that can make you forget? And Verlaine is like, nope, sorry, we don't have that yet. So we go on and we find out that somebody is weirdly smearing poo in bathrooms for some weird reason. And so they're calling them the crap finger, and whoever it is, like they're just really, whoever it is, they have to figure it out because they're really getting upset with this person. And also to not go on in any kind of community food that everyone is kind of sharing because of crap finger, and anybody would probably get sick. So we go on, and Jeff is to go in a room with Rogan, who is kind of a bigger, massive wrestling guy, of course. This, of course, is Nathan Jones. Big fan. Really like Nathan Jones, probably like just big he is, but he's I really like a lot of the stuff that he ends up doing. So we have Jeff and we have Rogan, and Jeff wants nothing to do with what this experiment is, of course, because he's like, I do not want to fall in love with Rogan. I do not want him to eventually like hate me or hurt me or whatever. Because Jeff is to find out that everyone is to go through the same experiment, because Jeff was to go on before he was getting in a room with Rogan, was to go and have the ability to give the two women that he had past slept with the ability to get one of them this certain fear drug that Jeff is like, no, like, I don't want to go on and give these people this drug because I know I, like, hated that drug. Like, I don't want to go on and give anybody this drug. So we have Steve that is to just kind of keep pushing Jeff, like, no, like, you have to go on, you have to flip a coin, you have to go on and choose. And Jeff's like, no, I won't. So when eventually Jeff is to be put in the same scenario, he doesn't want to acknowledge this test because he just doesn't want to do it. So Jeff is to come into the office and be upset with Steve and with um, Verlaine, and we have it to where Heather is there, just kind of going on, and so Jeff is like, "Oh, hi, Heather." So evidently, Heather has slept with those two guys, and so now, like, Steve has to sit Jeff down and tell him, like, "Well, hey, like, everybody's getting the same test. Like, look at this graph that I have here, showcasing you that everyone's going to be in the same boat. Like, you were just the first. Sorry." So we have Jeff and we have Rogan that consistently sit in this room, and there's never a time where this drug is to be triggered on anybody because no one wants to do it because people have had it before. So, really, Steve at this point is just kind of getting frustrated because no one wants to do this. Like, no one wants to pull this trigger. So, Steve is to finally go on and have Heather in a room alone and pulls Jeff in. And we also had the moment where Jeff was to go and get this moment where he can go and make this phone call. And so he ends up getting the voice message of his old girlfriend. And so Jeff is going like, well, like, it's always great to hear your voice. Like, I always want to tell you that I'm sorry and this and that. Because Jeff's backstory is that he was to go to a party and get very drunk. And supposedly the first part of this story is that we have Jeff and we have his friend that get in this car, and his friend is asking Jeff, it's like, well, hey, are you okay to drive? Like, are you cool? And Jeff's like, I'm super cool, or I'm very sober. Come to find out, we have Jeff and his friend who are to drive crazily out of control, and eventually Jeff is to smash into this tree. Jeff, because of how drunk he is, was to go on and not be harmed seemingly from this car accident, but his friend is possibly to be another story. Come to find out, there's another part of this story, which we really find out the true part of this, as it seems that Jeff is to more and more talk to Lizzie and want to tell her the real truth about this story. As Jeff was to go on and have this party and meet with his girlfriend and kind of hug her and kind of enjoy the beers that they had together and whatever, and then eventually Jeff leaves with his friend, supposedly. So, we have Jeff that is with Heather in this room, and he is consistently to have the button on the trigger supposedly to give Heather this fear drug, and he doesn't want to do it. Like, he just doesn't want to go and do this. But so we have Steve telling Jeff that, like, the board that Chris is getting information from is desperately wanting somebody to do this, so Jeff has to be the one guy. Like, if they go on and they do this, if Jeff goes on and does this, no one else is going to have to do it ever again. So Jeff is just like, well, I guess, like I'm needing to do this. Like, I probably won't leave this room unless I pull this trigger. So Jeff finally goes on and gives this girl this medication. And so when Verlaine was, of course, giving Jeff this medication from before, Verlaine was telling Jeff, it's like, well, hey, kind of make sure, like, you keep your, like, med pack from behind your back. Like, make sure that you kind of don't kind of bump into that too hard or injure it, because really, like, all kinds of crazy things can happen if that med pack gets injured that's behind your back. So all of a sudden, Heather is to start get this dark and flops whatever kind of drug, and so she's starting to vomit, she's starting to get really sick, she's starting to get scared, and so Heather is to eventually just start thrashing all over the place. And eventually she knocks her med pack, and she now is getting all kinds of drugs being put into her system. And they're like, oh my god, like this girl is going to lose her mind. So, all while we have Jeff, who I think is also on some medication, also. And so Jeff is to narrate what's going on with this girl. And so what happens is that this girl ends up becoming like so crazed that she ends up breaking off this certain item, grabbing it and stabbing it into herself to kill herself. And now both Steve and both Verlaine are in that room. And while that's going on, we have Jeff crazily scrambling to get these certain keys from Steve, who had dropped them, go into this certain drawer that was locked, and find out a bunch of information that no one else is privy to. That it seems that we go on, and we had Steve, who is kind of consistently putting gold stars on certain spots where he is to dub things certain medications, because the only one that is to really be having an actual name is the only drug that they really care about. Everything else. So really we come to find out that the drug that they're really working on is to be something called obedience. But it's said differently. It's like OBDX. That's going to be like the drug that forces people to do whatever they want. So that's what they're kind of mainly working on. So Jeff is to kind of find things out. And he also finds out that Steve has nobody to turn to. He has no board to be wanting anything to happen. Steve is just kind of manipulating people to say, "Oh no, I'm not getting any of these. Like I'm not making up all of this stuff. Someone else is. Someone's telling me to do it, and like I don't want to do it. But hey, like this board just wants this, so that's why I'm going on and forcing people to do all that." So we have Steve's character that is trying to go on and say that like this isn't his fault, but really it really is. So, because Verlaine is to know better, but Verlaine is also getting paid. So, anyways, now like a woman is dead in this experiment, and they're still kind of pushing this. They're still going on like all things are normal, and one of the janitors is just kind of cleaning up the mess. So we have Jeff that goes to Lizzie, and it seems that the two of them are trying as much as possible to get closer, as Jeff is to really reveal to Lizzie kind of what he had found out, but also he's telling her the truth that he was to at some point not only kill his best friend in his car accident, but he was also to kill his girlfriend, which immediately have Lizzie comfort Jeff, and they kiss, and there's a relationship possibly. And so we have Jeff that is to consistently do this. God, what is the old toy? The Etch-a-Sketch. There we go. And so we consistently see Jeff, who's doing this Etch-a-Sketch thing, that people are like, man, like this guy is so good at this Etch-a-Sketch, unbelievably so. So Jeff is to go on an Etch-a-Sketch at one point, Lizzie, and Steve is to see that like, aha, like I can use this against him. So we also have at one point one of the experiments, like there's a guy that is to consistently have hunger, so he's just consistently just chowing down at a whole plate full of food, or a whole table full of food. My apologies. So I just wanted to randomly add that in there because eventually it'll come back in towards the end of the movie. But anyways, so Steve, when he was supposedly going to the board and calling them, instead he was to ask Lizzie, uh, and kind of question her about the copper pans that she wanted, and that eventually like Steve just questions her and then just kind of leaves. And so, and that's kind of where he left instead of going to the board thing. So we have Jeff and Lizzie, who are to go on and say, it's like, man, like, is this really any different than us going and being in prison? Like, we can't really leave here. Like, we're kind of forced to do all these horrible things that make us sick or make us afraid or make us whatever. And like, all we're gonna get out of it is just like copper pots and pans, and like these little things that we don't even know like what time of the year it really is. We don't even know if it's Christmas or if it's October. We have no clue. Because Jeff is trying to be nice and is trying to like put shaving cream all over his face and pretend he's Santa, and to say that this is Christmas at one point for Lizzie. And Lizzie's like, "Oh my God, you're so goofy." Um, so like Jeff was trying to be like some kind of Santa-esh like character for her, so just to make her happy. So, and then they kind of hug, and she realizes that she got shaving cream on her face. So there's just a lot of this movie that just kind of happens wherever. So now we go on and we have Steve, who's going to use something against Jeff, because Steve wanted to figure out who's really in love in this place, so he can really go on and force people to make the tough decisions. So so Jeff is to go into this experiment and is to force Lizzie to take more of the fear drug. And so eventually, while Lizzie is to be forced by Jeff to do this experiment, eventually Jeff is to come into some real realizations of what Steve is to go on and do, and is to really tell him the truth here. And so Steve is to go on and say to Lizzie, it's like, well, hey, like if you guys are so much in love, like Lizzie, why aren't you ever telling Jeff the real truth about how you got here? Because Steve has her file, and so it seems that Lizzie had lied about how exactly she got to this point. So, because Lizzie was to say that she was to go on and be in a robbery, but actually that was not true. Lizzie was actually to have went to go and work at some Walmart and left her 9-month-old kid in this parking lot, and in a parking lot in her car. And so Lizzie was trying to just, like, she didn't have a home. She was homeless. She had a child, and she had no way to babysit this child because she had no money probably. So Lizzie was to leave her child in a car so she could go on and work, and come to find out that that kid died in the car. So that was the real reason why Lizzie was to have gone on and been here. She was charged with manslaughter. So now that Jeff is to go and find out that about Lizzie, it's like, well, that's no real difference than what Jeff had done. Like, he killed people recklessly, so in a car accident. So Jeff could really forgive Lizzie for that lie, or for like, because anybody else would not want to say that they killed their own child, sadly. So we have Jeff and we have Steve. So eventually Jeff, I guess there's a whole like remote control for everybody who gets drugs. So Jeff is to go on and amp up Steve's drugs to have him get every single drug all at once, after Jeff is to bash Steve against this kind of stairwell, and now Steve is getting every single drug inside of him at the same time. So, because Steve had administered this drug on himself to the point where when Steve would go to bed sometimes, he would go on and inject himself with these drugs, and he'd be like, whoa, like this feels great. And so eventually, Jeff would find out that Steve was taking these drugs, because eventually Jeff would walk in like, okay, I'm ready for this experiment. And Steve is just like, well, it would have been nice if you would have like kind of gave us a little heads up first before you came in here. Uh, so, because of course, Verlaine is kind of putting drugs inside Steve's med pack, and so like Jeff finds out that also Steve is using. But it's really kind of interesting how like Hemsworth is technically the villain in this story. I would kind of like a lot more. Like, I honestly think I like Chris Hemsworth as a villain in this story, even much more so than I do the hero. Yeah, I love Thor as much as anybody else, but I think that also Chris Hemsworth can make a really good villain. Um, if eventually he's kind of given these kind of roles to eventually kind of like do something different. So we have Jeff and we have Steve. They're kind of wrestling it out because Steve is to have this knife from his keychain, and now Jeff and Steve are wrestling it out while Verlaine is trying to help Lizzie. Or no, wait, Verlaine is not even there by the end of the movie because Verlaine is to have called in sick. So I'm thinking of Verlaine running off to Heather in the other part of this movie. So that, yeah. Anyways, then Steve running after Verlaine to help out with Heather. So we find out that Lizzie is getting all these doses of the fear drug, to the point of her like taking her own belt and kind of choking herself out to stop this fear coming inside of, or being inside of her system. So Jeff is noticing that Lizzie is choking herself out, and so now Jeff has to quickly go on and take out Steve to run off to find where Lizzie is in her room, and is to get her from choking and kind of bring her back. So, and take all these drugs out of Lizzie's med pack so they can run off together. Because Steve is to go on and tell Jeff that there is a number of people that are out this compound who honestly could have been released months ago, weeks ago. Supposedly Jeff could have been released 7 months ago, and this guy is still here. Lizzie could have also been like released also, because nobody is to really know like the days and nights that have passed. So anybody can just go on and think that like anybody could tell them like, oh, you've only been here for a month, because how would you really know? That's the whole experiment of the thing. And we also have Jeff asking Verlaine at one point like what is like the certain medication that he's newly being given, and Verlaine is saying, oh, it's just a placebo, and Jeff's like, what is it really? So, because we also had Lizzie, who was to go on and be having this phobic drug where they have her being afraid of a stapler, and she's kind of just scrambling away from the stapler because she's afraid of it. And they have to kind of convince her it's like, well, hey, this is cruel. And so they have to like tell her that it's a stapler, even though she can't be convinced of that. So now Jeff and Lizzie are running off, trying to get off this island because both of them can be released anyways. And Verlaine is going and trying to get the cops to this compound. So we have all these like boats that just say police on them because Verlaine is calling the cops on Steve. So we have Steve who goes over the intercom and telling every single uh, person who had been tested on, hey guys, like Jeff and Lizzie are all going to run off and kind of have this all be taken away from all you prisoners. Like, you guys are not going to be able to have the luxuries that you've had all because of them. Like, you should probably go after them and try to stop them or kill them if you have to, because they're all prisoners anyways. So now we have Jeff and we have Lizzie that is scrambling out of this compound, and we start to have people that are starting to pile up like, hey, I'm going to fight my way through here now. So one of the guys is go on to kind of fight Steve, and he gets away from that. The Crabfinger girl is to be relieved or be revealed as the druggy girl that it seemed that Jeff had to have a bedroom business moment with. And then he, of course, was to eventually have Finger get taken out. So we move on to have like the last guy who is to be the guy who eats a lot, and so Lizzie is to chuck at this guy who eats a lot and says like, hey, here's the key to the pantry, like you can eat all you want. And the guy's like, okay, great, like I'm not gonna fight you guys anyways. So now we see the rush of all the other technically inmates who are rushing their way to try to get to both Jeff and Lizzie. We have Steve, Chris Hemsworth, who is to get on this plane and is to try to scramble out of here, but he's so much in a mixture of drugs that he doesn't really know what he's doing, and he's kind of spinning out of control. So eventually he crashes his way into some mountain, and Jeff and Lizzie are on this boat just boating away on this speedboat. And both of them are just oddly laughing, and they just make their way out of this place because they're just like, yeah, we're freaking free. As we have the inmates that are trying to break down this door, but there's no real point of that because they can probably get out. They can probably swim out of this place if that's what they really wanted to do. But good luck with that. Because eventually they're not going to get to Jeff and Liz, and they immediately like close the door on them and lock the door. And that's why they were trying to break through that door, thinking that they could get to these two people, but yeah, not so much. So Verlaine, with all the cops, are to make their way to this place, and that's assuming the way the movie is to end, with this kind of chase kind of thing where you don't really see who gets to where. And so yeah, that's kind of how the movie just ends, as well as just kind of giving us a movie that we're just kind of like meh about. Hopefully I went on and said most of what happens in this movie. There's just a lot of jumbled mess of stuff that I went on and just said here, because really this movie is just a jumbled mess of just drug movie. And it's just very flat and just it's okay, but that's being nice. But a lot of people will probably like this movie. A lot of people will probably think that it's great, or a lot of people will say that it's awful. And really, I'm just in a mixed boat of just like, hey, it's a thing that you can watch for X amount of minutes to really just burn out your day. If you need something to do, watch Spiderhead, a goofy film that has something to do with drugs, and really it is to tease us with some passionate lovemaking, but it really doesn't get there. So, dare say I'm going to get out of here to go on and review something else for the day. Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy.